the sky had never looked so dark. It wasn't the usual storm clouds that sometimes rolled over the city, casting shadows over the bustling streets. No, this was different. For Sergeant Davis, the moment he saw those sleek, silver ships blotting out the sun, he knew the world would never be the same again. The Kaplan had arrived. Before their arrival, Earth had been living in blissful ignorance. There had always been hints, scientists speculating about life beyond the stars, and conspiracy theorists warning of secret government cover-ups. But no one, not even the most paranoid among them, had imagined the sheer scale of what was coming. The Kaplan weren't some distant possibility, they were real, and they were here. The day it all began was strangely ordinary. Davis had been at a routine training exercise with his unit when the first reports started flooding in. News stations across the globe switched to breaking coverage, showing live footage of giant silver vessels descending through the atmosphere. They hung silently in the sky, one over every major city on Earth. People stopped in the streets to watch, phones held up, documenting the moment alien contact was made. For hours, nothing happened. The ships just hovered there, like silent predators sizing up their prey. Governments scrambled, holding emergency meetings, issuing statements urging calm. Scientists speculated about what the aliens might want, some hoped for peaceful communication, others feared the worst. But in the back of everyone's mind, the same question lingered: why now? Why here? And then, without warning, the first shot was fired. Tokyo was the first to fall. A single energy blast from one of the Kaplan ships leveled the entire downtown area, turning skyscrapers into rubble in an instant. The world watched in horror as the carnage unfolded on live television. It didn't take long for the panic to spread. Within minutes, cities across the globe were plunged into chaos as people scrambled to flee the incoming threat. Governments tried to respond, but it was clear from the outset that Earth's military forces were hopelessly outmatched. The Kaplan's technology was like nothing humanity had ever seen. Their warships moved with an eerie precision, targeting military installations and infrastructure with devastating efficiency. Ground forces were deployed soon after, soldiers clad in shimmering energy shields that rendered them nearly invincible. Bullets bounced off harmlessly, tanks were reduced to smoldering heaps, and jets were swatted from the sky like flies. Davis had never felt so powerless. As he and his unit watched the destruction unfold on the news, orders came in. They were to regroup, head to the city, and assist with the evacuation efforts. But even then, Davis knew it was a losing battle. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't play by the same rules? An enemy that's light years ahead of you in technology? The drive into the city felt surreal. Roads were clogged with cars, people abandoning their vehicles in a desperate bid to escape on foot. Sirens blared constantly, mingling with the distant sounds of explosions and gunfire. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky, once a familiar shade of blue, was now darkened by the looming presence of the Kaplan fleet. When they arrived, it was chaos. Davis and his men were immediately tasked with helping to evacuate civilians, but it was clear that panic had already set in. People were running in every direction, terrified, desperate. Mothers clutching children, old men limping through the streets, young couples holding hands as if their grip on each other was the only thing keeping them grounded. Davis tried to keep his squad focused, barking orders, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands. And then the Kaplan ground forces appeared. They descended from their ships in sleek, metallic crafts that looked more like machines than anything alive. But when the hatches opened, what emerged were soldiers, tall, humanoid figures encased in shimmering armor, their faces obscured by helmets that glowed faintly. In their hands, they carried weapons that hummed with energy, a stark contrast to the rifles and pistols the humans clutched. Davis watched as the first wave of Kaplan troops moved methodically through the streets. There was no urgency in their movements, no sign of fear or hesitation. They were efficient, ruthless, like machines executing a pre-programmed directive. Civilians who had tried to flee were cut down where they stood, their bodies vaporized by the alien weapons. There was no time for mercy, no room for negotiation. The first firefight broke out just blocks away from where Davis and his team were stationed. He could hear the staccato crack of gunfire, punctuated by the high-pitched whine of the Kaplan's energy weapons. They were moving closer and fast. "Sergeant, we need to fall back." Private Monroe's voice broke through the commotion. Davis turned to see the young soldier, wide-eyed and pale, his hands shaking as he clutched his rifle. Monroe was fresh out of training, barely old enough to drink. Davis had seen that look before, fear, pure and unfiltered. Davis nodded. "Pull back. Get everyone into defensive positions." His voice cut through the noise, and his squad snapped into action. They didn't have much to work with, just a few abandoned vehicles and makeshift barricades hastily thrown together, but it would have to do. As they took cover behind an overturned Humvee, Davis stole a glance at the advancing Kaplan forces. They were getting closer, their energy shields shimmering in the dim light of the burning city. And then, an idea sparked in Davis's mind. It wasn't brilliant, and it wasn't conventional, but it was something. "Monroe!" Davis barked. "Get the balloons." The young soldier blinked, confused. "Balloons, sir?" "Yeah. You heard me." Monroe hesitated for a moment, but then rushed to follow the order. Minutes later, he returned, carrying a cluster of brightly colored party balloons, the kind you'd see at a child's birthday party. Attached to each balloon was a small brick, rigged with crude explosives. Davis grinned. "Load him up." Monroe gave him a bewildered look. "Are you serious, Sergeant? Balloons? Against them?" Davis didn't waver. "Trust me, soldier. Sometimes, the dumbest ideas are the best ones." Monroe gave a shaky nod and went to work, passing the makeshift balloon bombs to the rest of the squad. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. And right now, it would have to be enough. As the Kaplan soldiers continued their advance, Davis watched, waiting for the right moment. The aliens moved with the same mechanical precision, their energy shields shimmering as they marched down the street. They were close now, close enough that Davis could see the faint glow of their weapons as they prepared to fire. "Now!" Davis shouted into his comms. Monroe and the others released the balloons, sending them floating lazily into the air. It was almost comical, the bright, colorful balloons drifting toward the enemy, like some kind of twisted parade. For a moment, even Davis doubted the sanity of what they were doing. But then the first explosion went off. It wasn't a large blast, but it was enough. The Kaplan's perfect formation faltered as bricks and shrapnel rained down from above. Their energy shields flickered, momentarily disrupted by the chaotic assault. And in that brief window, the humans struck. "Charge!" Davis bellowed, leaping from behind the Humvee. The street erupted into chaos as the human forces surged forward. Soldiers and civilians alike, armed with whatever they could find, rifles, knives, crowbars, even baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire. It was a ragtag group, far from the disciplined military unit Davis had once commanded, but they had one thing the Kaplan didn't expect: desperation. The Kaplan, for all their superior technology and training, were caught off guard by the sheer unpredictability of the human assault. Their energy shields, designed to deflect bullets and energy blasts, were useless against the haphazard mix of explosives and shrapnel. And as their formation broke apart, the humans closed in. Davis swung his crowbar at the nearest Kaplan soldier, the metal clanging off the alien's armor with a satisfying thud. The alien staggered, and Davis followed up with a second strike, aiming for the helmet. The visor cracked, and the alien collapsed with a grunt. Private Monroe, still wide-eyed from the insanity of it all, followed his sergeant's lead. He hurled a Molotov cocktail at a nearby Kaplan, the glass bottle shattering against its shield. Fire erupted across the alien's armor, the shield flickering out of existence as the flames consumed it. The Kaplan stumbled back, disoriented, and the humans pressed their advantage. It was chaos, pure, unbridled chaos. And in that chaos, the humans thrived. For the Kaplan, this wasn't how war was supposed to be fought. Their soldiers, trained in the art of precision warfare, found themselves overwhelmed by the disorganized, unpredictable tactics of the humans. Energy bolts flew wildly through the air, tearing through buildings and cars, but for every shot the Kaplan fired, 10 more humans charged forward, armed with makeshift weapons and blind determination. How long do you think they'll last? Monroe shouted over the din, ducking behind a burning car as a Kaplan rifle discharged overhead. Long enough for us to win, Davis replied, hurling another makeshift grenade over the wreckage. The ground shook as the grenade exploded, the force sending debris flying. The Kaplan soldiers stumbled, their shields flickering as they struggled to maintain their formation. Davis could feel the tide of the battle shifting. The once imposing alien forces were now on the defensive, their energy weapons firing wildly as the humans closed in. Davis shouted for his men to keep pushing, and they responded with a ferocity he hadn't anticipated. Civilians and soldiers fought side by side, some brandishing kitchen utensils, others carrying anything that could serve as a weapon. The absurdity of it all fueled their resolve. They were fighting not just for survival, but for their homes, their families, and their very way of life. A group of civilians rushed past Davis, their riot shields held high to deflect incoming fire. They shouted encouragement to one another, a chaotic battle cry that filled the air with a sense of camaraderie. Behind them, a makeshift squad of soldiers lobbed grenades and tossed rocks, their laughter mingling with the sounds of battle. Davis couldn't help but smile, even amidst the chaos. This was human spirit in its purest form, resilient, irreverent, and downright ridiculous. Monroe was at his side, tossing another homemade explosive into the fray. The explosion sent a shockwave through the crowd, and the humans surged forward once more, emboldened by their success. The Kaplan were starting to falter, their shields sputtering and flickering under the relentless assault. "They're not so tough," Davis shouted, his voice hoarse from the exertion. "Just need to get creative." The battle raged on, a bizarre spectacle of modern and primitive clashing in ways that no military strategist could have anticipated. Davis found himself caught in a whirlwind of action, dodging energy bolts and shouting orders, his crowbar swinging with practiced precision. He could see his men gaining ground, inch by inch, as they overwhelmed the alien forces with sheer numbers and absurd tactics. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Davis spotted something that made his heart race, a cluster of repurposed hobby drones buzzing overhead. They weren't military drones, they were the kind people flew for fun, modified with small explosives and set loose among the Kaplan ranks. The sight was almost comical, the tiny machines darting around like angry bees, drawing the attention of the aliens. "They're not going to know what hit them." Monroe laughed, his fear forgotten as he watched the drones dive bomb into the Kaplan soldiers. Davis couldn't help but chuckle. It was a ridiculous sight, and yet it was working. The Kaplan were struggling to target the erratic little machines, dodging explosions that erupted at random intervals. Each blast caused confusion, the aliens momentarily breaking their focus as they scrambled to regain control. "Keep pushing," Davis bellowed, his adrenaline pumping. "They won't know what hit them." The Kaplan, once the epitome of calculated warfare, were now overwhelmed by the chaos of human tactics. Their formation shattered further, and Davis could see the panic starting to set in. The aliens were used to precision strikes and calculated maneuvers, not the wild unpredictability that humans were displaying. They had come expecting an easy victory, but instead, they were met with chaos. "Monroe!" Davis called out, spotting a makeshift catapult assembled from scraps of metal and wood. It looked absurd, but it was a testament to the human ingenuity on display. "Get that thing loaded." Monroe sprinted to the contraption, his face set with determination. "What are we launching, Sergeant?" "Anything we can find. Let's show them what we can do," Davis shouted, his heart racing with excitement. The first round of projectiles, water balloons filled with gasoline and nails, was loaded into the catapult. Davis could only shake his head at the sheer absurdity of it. It was ridiculous, but it was exactly the kind of thinking they needed. "Ready to launch," Monroe shouted, his hands gripping the release lever. The Kaplan were still scrambling, trying to regroup, completely unaware of the impending onslaught. "Fire!" Davis commanded, his heart pounding. The catapult launched its payload high into the air, the water balloons soaring like comets of doom. When the first balloon hit, there was a satisfying splat, igniting flames that engulfed several Kaplan soldiers. The gasoline ignited, sending bright flames shooting up, and Davis could see the shock and horror on the aliens' faces as they realized the absurdity of their situation. Their energy shields flickered and fizzled, overwhelmed by the sheer chaos that the humans were unleashing. "Now! Everyone, go!" Davis commanded, his voice booming over the chaos. The human forces surged forward, a tide of desperate determination. They fought like demons, pressing the advantage. Civilians armed with anything they could find rushed into the fray alongside soldiers wielding makeshift weapons. They weren't well equipped, but they had something far more powerful, their sheer will to fight back. A Kaplan soldier, energy rifle raised, took aim at Davis. He dove behind a nearby car, barely dodging the energy bolt that zipped past him. "Nice try," he shouted, popping back up with a brick in hand. With a swift motion, he hurled the brick at the Kaplan's face. The alien's shield flickered but didn't fully absorb the impact. The brick shattered the alien's visor, and it stumbled back, disoriented. "Did you just kill a Kaplan with a brick?" Monroe asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "If it works, it works," Davis replied, panting heavily as he scanned the battlefield. The Kaplan were now in full retreat, scrambling to regroup as humans pressed the attack. The sky was filled with hobby drones buzzing like angry wasps, exploding as they dive-bombed into the alien ranks. The Kaplan, once a unified force, were now a disjointed collection of soldiers trying to hold the line against an onslaught of humanity that they could never have predicted. "Sergeant, they're breaking!" Monroe yelled, his voice filled with excitement. "They're on the ropes!" Davis squinted through the smoke and debris, his heart racing as he saw it too. The once impenetrable glow of the Kaplan energy shields was sputtering. Their assault was faltering, and the formations they had relied on were crumbling. "Keep up the pressure!" Davis shouted, sprinting forward. His boots pounded against the asphalt as he weaved through the chaos. Up ahead, a Kaplan officer was trying to regroup his soldiers, barking orders in a language no human could understand. The Kaplan had stopped trying to be careful, they were panicking now, their rifles blazing wildly into the air as humans closed in on all sides. Davis grinned, the exhilaration of the battle coursing through him. He could feel the tide turning. "Monroe! Bring the special delivery!" Monroe was a few feet behind him, dragging the makeshift catapult into position, sweat pouring down his brow. "This is the dumbest thing we've ever done," he muttered as he hurried to load it up again. "But it's going to work," Davis replied, unable to suppress his excitement. "Let's give them something to really remember." With a grunt, Monroe finished loading it. "Ready to launch." Davis positioned himself behind cover, watching as the Kaplan tried to regroup. Their energy weapons had once commanded respect, but now they were panicking under the pressure of human creativity. "Fire!" he ordered. The catapult released its payload once more, and the balloons soared through the air like missiles. The first hit the ground with a splat, gasoline igniting and sending flames licking through the ranks of Kaplan soldiers. The chaos was palpable as the aliens tried to flee, colliding with one another in their desperation to escape the inferno. "Now! Everyone, charge!" Davis shouted, the adrenaline surging through him. The human forces surged forward, overwhelming the Kaplan soldiers with sheer numbers. They fought like they had nothing to lose, an unstoppable wave of humanity pushing back against the invaders. Davis could see the fear on the faces of the Kaplan, once confident and assured, now desperate and panicked. The battlefield had transformed into a surreal tableau of destruction. Buildings burned around them, casting flickering shadows across the ground. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning gasoline. The sounds of battle echoed through the streets, a cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and shouts of defiance. In that moment, Davis felt a surge of hope. They were winning, not through superior technology or strategy, but through sheer determination and creativity. It was messy, chaotic, and undeniably human. The Kaplan soldiers were starting to falter, their shields flickering and their ranks breaking. Davis seized the opportunity, pushing forward with renewed vigor. He spotted a group of Kaplan trying to regroup, their once cohesive formation now a jumbled mess. "Monroe! Grab that catapult again!" Davis commanded. Monroe nodded, scrambling to get it back in position. The chaos around them seemed to fuel his determination. "Ready, Sergeant!" "Fire!" Davis shouted, his heart racing. The catapult launched again, and this time the water balloons hit harder than ever. The explosions ripped through the Kaplan ranks, sending them reeling. Davis could see the panic setting in as the aliens struggled to regain their composure. "Keep going!" Davis bellowed, his voice ringing out over the noise. "We're almost there." The tide of battle had shifted completely. The Kaplan were no longer the fearsome invaders they had once seemed. They were disorganized, panicked, and overwhelmed by the absurdity of the human tactics they faced. The ground forces that had once dominated the streets were now on the run, scrambling for their ships as the humans pressed forward. With each passing moment, the humans grew more confident. Their laughter rang out amidst the chaos, their makeshift weapons wielded with renewed vigor. Davis led the charge, determined to push the invaders back and reclaim their city. "Don't stop now," he urged, his heart swelling with pride at the bravery of his men and the civilians who fought alongside them. "Let's send them packing." The streets echoed with the sound of victory as humans poured into the fray, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph. The Kaplan soldiers, who had once marched with such certainty, were now scrambling to escape, their once impenetrable line shattered by the relentless determination of the humans. As Davis pressed forward, he could see the Kaplan ships hovering ominously in the sky, their silver hulls glinting in the fading light. He knew they couldn't let the aliens escape. They had to make a statement, a declaration that humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. "Get to the ships," he shouted to his squad. "We need to make sure they can't regroup." The soldiers surged toward the nearest Kaplan craft, their energy shields flickering ominously. The alien technology had once seemed insurmountable, but now it was within reach. Davis felt a surge of adrenaline as they closed in, ready to dismantle the enemy's means of escape. As they approached the alien ship, Davis could see the panic on the faces of the Kaplan soldiers inside. They were frantically trying to activate their ship's defenses, but it was too late. The humans were there, armed with makeshift weapons and fueled by sheer determination.
"Monroe! Grab that explosive!" Davis commanded, pointing at a bundle of incendiaries left behind in the chaos. Monroe rushed forward, securing the explosives with shaking hands. "What now, Sergeant?" "We blow the ship and send a message," Davis shouted, his heart racing with excitement. "We're taking the fight to them." With a swift motion, he and Monroe began rigging the explosives around the ship's entrance. The sounds of battle echoed in the background, but they focused on their task, determined to make the Kaplan pay for their invasion. As they set the last explosive, a flicker of doubt crossed Monroe's face. What if they come back? What if they're just regrouping? "They will," Davis replied, "but not if we destroy their ships. We need to show them they can't just waltz in here and take what they want." With a nod of understanding, Monroe took a deep breath and activated the detonator. The explosion was deafening. Flames shot into the sky, and the shockwave knocked them both off their feet. Davis quickly scrambled to his feet, heart pounding as he turned to see the Kaplan ship engulfed in flames, smoke rising into the air. The sight filled him with a rush of exhilaration. They had done it. They had pushed back the invaders and made their presence known. But even as the adrenaline surged through him, he knew the fight was far from over. The Kaplan ships were still hovering above, and the remaining forces were regrouping. Davis looked around at the chaos. The streets were littered with debris, the once bustling city now a battlefield. But amidst the destruction, he could see the determination in the eyes of his fellow soldiers and civilians. They had fought back against an overwhelming enemy, and they wouldn't stop now. "We've pushed them back, but we can't let up," Davis shouted, rallying his troops. "Let's keep the pressure on. We fight for every inch." As they charged forward, Davis felt a sense of unity among the humans. They were no longer just soldiers or civilians, they were a force to be reckoned with. Their desperation had turned into strength, and together, they would push the invaders back. The battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire and explosions mixing with the shouts of victory. Davis led the charge, his heart swelling with pride at the sight of his men and women fighting side by side, their determination unyielding. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the devastation, Davis knew this was only the beginning. They had fought back against the Kaplan, but the war was far from over. The fight for Earth had only just begun, and together, they would rise up against the invaders. They wouldn't let fear dictate their actions any longer. They were humans, and they would fight for their home with everything they had. Together, they would send a message to the stars: Earth would not go down without a fight.